everybody. Good afternoon. Say it again, good afternoon. I hope you're having an amazing day. I saw that there was a little glam room. I wanted to glam, but I also needed to calm myself down, so I will glam later. But congratulations, and thank you, Etta, for that amazing introduction, and congrats to Belly for this 20th anniversary of the Gearing Up Conference for Women. I was sharing with a few of you that I think it has been about that long since I started coming on this campus. I just ran into Gloria Arce-Cordes, who was one of my, I don't think you knew this, role models way back, because I also started my career as a lawyer. And when she became president of Bentley, I said, oh my goodness, a lawyer can become a president of a university. Like that law degree really has some value, right? There's something we can do with that. So I'm having a little blast from the past. So many people here that I've known along the years, along my journey. So it's great to be here today. So let me put on my glasses. So want to thank also the CWB team at Bentley University Leadership for hosting this, for having me today. I know you could have many keynote speakers, and I just really appreciate the opportunity to share a bit of my story. And looking around the room, I do see the future of leadership here, women who are breaking barriers, but also reimagining power, purpose, and progress in our rapidly changing world. So today, you're going to hear a little bit about my story, which I call a story of transformation. I literally am a kid that grew up in the projects in New York City, and never did I imagine that I could be in some of the rooms I am today. So we'll talk a bit about what is possible when we reimagine how power flows, how purpose drives decision-making, and how we can create progress that benefits everyone, not just a privileged few. All right, so how did I get here? I'm from New York City. Sorry, read people distracted a little bit. So I'm originally from New York City. My mom's Puerto Rican. My father's Chinese. For those of you who know me, I'm a Chino Rican. And I ended up coming to Boston for law school and business school. I did a JD MBA, and I started my career in 1998, the height of the dot-com boom. And I started as a business lawyer in one of these, what they call white shoe law firms, called Palmer & Dodge at the time. And I thought I had made it. I was representing startups, venture capital firms, growing businesses. I was meeting and advising pretty brilliant tech and life sciences entrepreneurs, facilitating multi-million-dollar deals. I remember I worked on the eve of, forget which New Year's Eve it was, but I was at the printer, like on a $1 billion merger. And it was like, wow, look at the power that I'm having, doing this deal. But meanwhile, I was a little grunt, right? Like willing to stay for over New Year's Eve working on that transaction. But I learned so much from that experience. And one of the biggest takeaways from me, and it's just learning like how deals get made, how money flows. It was sitting in deal rooms and boardrooms and not being able to ignore what was missing. And that was that women of color especially, were virtually absent from the tables where these capital decisions were being made. The entrepreneurs that were seeking funding were overwhelmingly white and male. And the venture capitalists, though writing the checks, looked remarkably similar. I don't think in my whole time practicing law in that firm, I had seen one woman in a venture firm. And that's really different today, right? So that ecosystem really determined what innovations would be funded, and that reflected a narrow slice of our diverse communities. Like the beautiful room that we are in today was just not represented there. So it's that realization that planted a seed that would eventually transform not just my career, but my understanding of how change does happen. I started to ask, who am I making money for? Who am I helping get rich? It wasn't me. Although I made a pretty good salary, I wasn't getting rich. And I was witnessing firsthand how access to capital, which is the lifeblood of innovation and wealth creation, was systematically excluding entire communities of innovators like you. So after practicing law for 15 years in this law firm and eventually in-house, I got this entrepreneurial itch. I had an MBA and I said, I want to use that to do something. So after having two beautiful daughters, I had this profound shift of purpose. And I decided to start the craziest thing, a youth fitness business called Reimagine Play. I literally was in my little shorts, lugging tires and obstacle course equipment to parks to build what I thought was going to be this Ninja Warrior gym. And I still think it's a fabulous idea, believe me. I think one day if I could get the energy again, I would try to start this up. But I saw this need for fitness options for families, especially in an urban area in Boston. I didn't know where to take my kids, and I knew they wanted to do really cool fitness activities. And so I started this business, and suddenly I was on the other side of the table. I was the one seeking capital instead of advising those who have it. And that experience was pretty humbling and eye-opening, I would say, because I thought I was connected. I thought I knew a lot. I did these multi-million-dollar deals. I know a lot about business, but I didn't know how to start a startup. And so this was what I learned over time. Like, I did everything myself, right? I built the website, I incorporated, I got insurance, I started to build my network, I had to figure out how to get contracts. All the stuff small businesses have to do, I actually did it very scrappily and on my own. And when it came time to figure out how to get capital, right, to launch this bigger thing, I couldn't get it. And I first went to banks. Well, guess what? Banks don't lend to you unless you've been in operation for more than 2 or 3 years, unless you show revenue. They don't lend to startups, right? I didn't know that. In fact, they asked me, do you have a father or a husband that could co-sign for your loan? I was like, dude, quick. I'm a powerful woman. Don't let my husband sack me. So, but that's the way things were, right? And this was, 10 years, not even 10 years ago. And also, being asked to put up collateral, significant collateral like your babies or your home was just not fair to me. I thought, I spent so much of my time, my career building a little bit of wealth, right? Finally being able to buy a home and coming from a place where I did break the cycle of generational poverty from my family. I didn't want to put all that at risk, right? I said, that's just not what I want to do right now. So I just thought finding capital for a business was really tough. And I started to appreciate what other business owners have to do. And my goal at that time was to build a business that could create wealth for my family, but without capital, it was impossible to move forward. So that realization led me to do two things. So this is about 2015 or so, but 3 years before that, when I was still practicing law, I started a group called Latina Circle. Some of you in this room were part of that group. Way back, I started it with Anela Roman, another lawyer. And the group was focused on getting more Latinas and women of color into positions of power and leadership, into decision-making roles of influence. And we did that through mentorship, sponsorship, championing women into these decision-making roles. I would spend so much time nominating people, recommending people, and also helping women run for office. And in 3 years, that network grew to about 3,000 women. Many of them were business owners. And because we understood the barriers to capital, the barriers to starting and growing businesses, especially Latino businesses that may not always understand the environment in the US, we launched an initiative called Power Up, the Power Up Business Initiative in 2015. That initiative has connected now over 500, I think even more, Latino businesses to resources, coaching, and capital, and help them grow and amplify. This network became Amplify Latinx, focused on building economic and political power, and now Latino prosperity for the Commonwealth. That's actually how I learned what resources exist for small businesses. There's tons here. So we are one of the most resource-rich states for small businesses, and yet many of those don't reach women or people of color. They don't know where to find them. Many of them are not culturally competent or relevant. And I thought, okay, I want to be part of helping connect these resources to these businesses. At the same time, because I'm crazy and I like to do multiple things at the same time, I discovered a group called Pipeline Angels. And it was the founder of Pipeline Angels is another Latina, Natalia Huerti Noguera. And I saw her name in the Boston Business Journal one day. She was here for a conference. And I said, who is this Latina that I don't know? So I looked her up and I found this program called Pipeline Angels, focused on helping to get more women to become angel investors so that they in turn will invest capital into women-owned social ventures. I was like, wow, that's what I need. I need that capital, but I also want to learn how to invest. I'm so curious. I'm like the kid, right, that likes to try a lot of things. So I joined this program, Pipeline Angels, which connects you with other angel investors that want to invest in startups. And I made my first investment. It was $5,000, but when we grouped it together, it was $35,000, and it was into this ed tech company called Vidco, which got sold a few years ago. And I'll tell you what that program and that network taught me was that we can all invest together. It gave me confidence to keep investing into early stage companies owned by women and diverse founders, understanding firsthand the transformative power of patient, values-aligned capital, right? It's the money, but it's also the knowledge capital, the social capital that you bring to these business owners that really need a bigger network opened up. More importantly, Pipeline Angels taught me that becoming an investor isn't just about having money to deploy. It's about who fundamentally gets to decide where money flows. Once I knew I had power to invest and influence who gets capital, I decided to dedicate my career to impact investing, but specifically to advance racial and economic justice, to address the inequalities in how capital moves, and to help open up more doors for capital for business owners. For too long, right, we know investment decisions have been made by a homogeneous group of people that don't see the potential in founders that they haven't traditionally funded. And when we change who's making these decisions, we can change everything. So fast forward. In 2021, I joined Boston Impact Initiative as CEO. And part of why I went there was because I wanted to launch a fund, and it was an existing model that I thought I could learn a lot from. Now I get to control the allocation of capital through what we call trust-based investing. And this approach fundamentally changes the way capital has been allocated, breaking systems designed to favor those who already have wealth while excluding communities of color, women, and working class entrepreneurs. At BII, we've actually flipped the script, literally. That's what we try to do. And we focus on local, place-based investing to overlooked businesses that create good jobs and support economic development. We lend money without credit checks and personal guarantees. Remember that guarantee the bank wanted? We don't do that. We don't ask for that. We use an integrated capital approach. So what is that? We understand that you have to blend capital. You can't just go to a bank and get a loan. You can't just go to ask a VC for equity investments. You need to blend different kinds of capital at different stages of a business. And we understand that, so we're able to deploy equity, debt, grants, and structure really creative transactions to meet the needs of entrepreneurs when they first come to us. And we couple that with coaching and connections to help build sustainable firms. Over the last 11 years, BII has deployed $16 million to 85 women and diverse-owned businesses across Massachusetts and now in New England. And what's exciting for me is I had never raised money before, and I've raised $17 million towards our $20 million fund. We're almost done. And we also received certification as a CDFI. CDFI is a community development finance institution that is certified by Treasury, by the federal government. Our friends right now. And we're also one of the very few Latina-led CFIs in the country. And I take that responsibility very seriously because part of our mission is to move more capital to Black and Latino-owned businesses, as well as businesses in low-income communities across New England. So we're not just taking the change in approach, but we're designing the way capital is flowing to small businesses. And here's what excites me, it always excites me, we're also changing who gets to be an investor. So we run a fund manager training program. We started that in 2020 because many people started to ask us, how do you start an impact fund? How do we replicate your model in other parts of the country? And this was coming from movement leaders, grassroots organizers, folks that were working with small businesses. And they wanted to know, how do we take this model and bring this kind of capital to our own place? And so through this training program, which is majority, if there's 70 people we've trained, and they're majority women, people of color, and those that have been overlooked in capital allocation roles, out of that group, 22 funds have launched to date. They're collectively deploying $100 million into small businesses across the country, right? So when we come together, when we take them on, and not one organization scales it, but many, right, proliferate, they can help change the way we invest. And these funds are pretty special. They prioritize investing in employee-owned businesses, in cooperative enterprises, in land trusts. They're investing in models that are significantly different from what you have seen. And why? Why does this matter? Because when you change who's making investment decisions, you change who gets funded. They're funding those businesses that create not just good jobs, but jobs with benefits, with pathways to advancement, that provide ownership stakes and create pathways for building generational wealth for workers. All right, so why do we care, right? Why is this so important? And why as women is this really important? So a couple of things. One is I want to share the power of women-owned businesses. And maybe you covered this earlier today, but I will reiterate. According to the latest research from the National Women's Business Council, there's over 14.5 million women-owned businesses in the US, and they account for 40%, right, of the businesses in our country. In 2024, they generated $3.3 trillion in revenue. They employed over 12 million people with an estimated $500 billion in annual payroll. Now that's economic clout, right? That's significant economic prosperity for some of these women, right? But when we look under the hood, many of these businesses are small. They have under 5 employees. They generate under $200,000 in annual revenue. And we ask ourselves, what can we do about that, right? What are some of the barriers? And here's where a great opportunity lies. McKinsey talks about this opportunity that if women-owned businesses achieve the average revenue of male-owned businesses, we could add $10.2 trillion in revenue to the US economy. But it would take 120 years at our current pace. Well, not in our generation, right? So what do you think is the biggest barrier to growth? Capital. Yes. So that brings me to this point. We need more women in leadership roles where they control the allocation of capital. Capital is power. And if we want to shift power dynamics, we need to shift who controls capital. And in the context of building what we all want, a more equitable economy, transformation means going beyond shifting some ownership and some wealth to those who don't have it. It actually means we have to rebuild institutions and companies where we all get the opportunity to own and make decisions. This is how we create real transformation and what I'll get to later, the ownership economy. So how are we going to do this, right? Let's face it. Let's talk for a minute, not to dampen the room by the mood, but we are confronting a backlash, right? The moment that we're operating in is incredibly challenging. We're facing significant political and cultural backlash against the progress that women and communities of color have made over the past several decades. And some of the forces shaping this moment are an unprecedented concentration of political power among the wealthy, among billionaires wielding the influence that rivals nation states. Our wealth divide, where we talk a lot about the wealth divide, is getting worse, right? With the bottom 80% of the population in the US owning just 8% of the wealth. And we're facing a global populist movement that fundamentally distrust government. And they distrust institutions and corporations like universities, and they're blowing it all up, right? And at the same time, our corporations, which were stepping up a little bit during the 2020 racial reckoning, are retreating from their commitments to racial equity under this political pressure. We're even getting it. Some might say to us that we should step back, that this focus on, investing in diverse founders is gonna call attention, that we should scrub our website, that we should remove DEI references, that we should just wait for calmer political waters. One, we don't want to do that. But really, two, is that this is the opportunity about disruption, right? When you have disruption, it creates space for transformation and not just change. So think about the industries that are being disrupted right now. AI is reshaping the way we work. Renewable energy is displacing fossil fuels. And then new business models, like the ones I'll talk about in a minute, they're emerging faster than regulations can keep up. And that's exactly where we have an opportunity to build something entirely different rather than just improving what exists right now. And at BI, we've chosen to lean into this moment and not retreat from it. And we're proving every day that investing in women and in communities of color is not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. These are the communities that are growing, that are building economic power. They're the workforce of our future. And our portfolio shows that they can address social and environmental needs and address these problems, yet have strong financial results, right? So we're myth busting this idea that these businesses can't produce strong revenue. So that brings me to the heart of what I want to share today. So we have an urgent need to reimagine how ownership and power work in our economy. This traditional model where a small group of entrepreneurs and investors capture most of the value created by a business is not sustainable. That's our current capitalist model. And we're on the verge of the largest intergenerational transfer of wealth in human history, called the Great Wealth Transfer. I don't know if you guys know this, but McKinsey estimates that women are going to inherit $34 trillion in investable assets by 2030. That's $34 trillion. And that'll reach over $100 trillion over the course of the next 25 years. They're inheriting this wealth, right, from their husbands, from their families. And that represents a huge seismic potential to shift who controls capital, but also who gets to load it, who gets to deploy it. So how do we take advantage of this massive wealth transfer? So this is where I'm going to invite you to embrace what we call the ownership economy. And this is a growing movement to shift business models towards more widely distributed ownership and decision-making power. In an ownership economy, we do a couple of things. We think a little differently. So we prioritize people, human beings, and our planet over pure profit maximization. We embrace cooperative ownership models so that workers and community members have pathways to build wealth and assets over time. And we expand and share ownership of land so that all can benefit. Right now, so much land is concentrated in the hands of institutional investors and not people. And we also ensure that those most affected by economic decisions have a voice in making them. What a novel idea that you get a chance to decide, right, what your company might do, what new product may go online, whether, they lay people off. I mean, those are novel concepts. And this isn't just idealistic thinking. It's actually practical economics for the 21st century. So what does this look like in practice? There's a really good example of cooperative ownership that comes out of Spain. It's called the Mondragon Corporation, and it's one of the world's largest worker cooperatives, which emerged out of political unrest in the 1950s. Mondragon now employs over 80,000 people across 200 cooperative enterprises. And these are not little teeny tiny businesses, right? These are huge, sometimes top tier manufacturing facilities, banks, insurance companies, supermarkets, agricultural businesses, health, and educational institutions. Mondragon actually started as a university and proliferated this concept. In Ecuador, in Latin America, in Puerto Rico, where my mother is from, there are cooperatives everywhere, right? This model is not new, but it's new here, newish here. But we have actually some powerful examples right here in Massachusetts of co-ops. The Cooperative Bank, right, in Jamaica Plain, Reading Cooperative in the North Shore, there are banks right here in Massachusetts that are owned by the depositors, not by shareholders. Boston Community Solar and Co-op Power's Community Solar Program, they're building community-owned solar projects that benefit low-income neighborhoods. One of my dreams is to build onshore wind, like those wind turbines, but I want to own it. And you can afford it with me. Right? Cheap electricity, and you get the profits from the energy creation. Dorchester Food Co-op, where I live, I'm a member of the Dorchester Food Co-op. They're a retail and member cooperative owned by workers and community members. Companies like Democracy Brewing and City Fresh Foods, they've adopted stock ownership plans that distribute profits and provides decision-making to workers. I gotta tell you, you know when something's good because private equity firms like KKR and Blackstone have been incorporating employee ownership into their investments to help create more employee productivity and an ownership mindset, but it actually helps create more wealth for workers. All right, so this is where you can take your notebook out. So how do we do this, right? So how do we transform our institutions towards an ownership economy? And I want to offer you 3 strategies. So one is positioning yourself to control capital allocation. The most radical thing you can do is to get yourself into a position where you decide where money goes, not just your money, but other people's money. Yeah. And look at what's possible when women control capital at scale. So the woman that I love for this example is Melanie Hobson. She didn't just break into finance. She built Ariel Investments into a $17 billion powerhouse. That's one of the largest Black-owned money managers in the US. And she also fundamentally changed how institutional investors think about diversity. She also founded Project Black, which is a private equity fund that raised $1.4 billion to acquire middle market businesses and create sustainable minority-owned ventures. She raised $1.4 billion. She is no joke. But you don't need billions to make an impact, right? There's a few hundred angel groups, impact funds, venture funds that have sprouted up over the last 10 years. When I started doing that Pipeline and Angels program, I would go into rooms with angel investors. There were 3 women. Now there's dozens and dozens of women and hundreds of funds that are led and owned by women. Learn who they are, follow them. Buy from the companies that they invest in, recommend them, right? You can do small things to help amplify what they do. And even if you're just starting your career or you are in a position to make bigger investments, we need to build this mindset where we ask the type of questions that shift control of capital to more women and people of color. And we do that, right, by trying to invest through whatever platforms we can. There's crowdfunding now. You can invest as little as $500 into a business. You can join an angel group. You can get yourself onto investment committees, right? Many of these investment committees need diverse perspectives. Ask where your university endowment is invested, right? Is this endowment invested in diverse fund managers? Launch an investment circle with your friends. I was part of one called the Dividend Group. There's an amazing group of women that bought public securities, but they would research them, recommend them to each other, and they actually made a lot of money. And then also buy from co-ops, buy from employee-owned businesses, change your banking, right? So that you're banking with credit unions, with cooperatively owned banks. There are little steps you can take to shift the way money moves. And believe me, at scale, if you're all doing it, you really will have a huge impact. Every procurement decision, every vendor selection, every budget allocation is an opportunity to redirect resources towards businesses that share your values. Strategy number 2, advocate for ownership models that share power. This idea of shared power is hard. And here's what they don't want you to know, that cooperative and employee-owned businesses consistently outperform traditional models on almost every financial metric that matters. But also, they have greater worker satisfaction, community resilience, long-term profitability, and they help to distribute wealth. The research shows that employee-owned companies, whether it's co-ops or employee stock ownership plans, these companies tend to be more resilient during an economic downturn. They lay off fewer people and they go out of business less often than traditional companies. Why? Because everybody shares, right, in the outcome of their institutions. And yet, if they're so fabulous, right, they represent such a tiny fraction of our economy. We just have not adopted this model here. And that's because concentrated ownership serves the interests of a few who already have power. It's not in the interest, right, of our billionaires to adopt these models. It's really up to us to try to proliferate these. And these start small. They also are in the real estate arena. So there's groups like Push Buffalo, the Guild in Atlanta, Kensington Corridor Trust in Philadelphia. These are women-led organizations that are acquiring land. They're acquiring land to build community-owned and governed real estate. They're going to own it. They're going to own it with their community, with the residents that live there. And they're going to offer pathways to building generational wealth. In addition, they're preventing displacement, right, in their communities by owning what might get acquired by a big mega institution. They're keeping ownership of land local. And they're proving that community ownership of assets is the most effective strategy for building generational wealth in working class communities. So we've been taught, because I know at one point I was a big fan of this, negotiating salaries, salary negotiation. Let's make sure we're asking for the most we can on our salary. That's important. But you know what? We should start demanding ownership. An ownership state. If you're starting a business, consider a cooperative governance structure. Consider an employee stock ownership plan when you can do it. And if you have a business and you're going to sell it, try to sell that business to your employees, right? Consider a conversion. And we have to learn what these models are, right? Business schools need to start teaching this as a matter of course so that we all have the knowledge and the agency to be able to advance these kinds of ownership models. So when you're in positions of influence, push for profit sharing, employee stock ownership, community benefit corps, B corps, whatever floats your boat. Start to talk about it. Take a course, learn about it. And when you're making procurement decisions, try to prioritize cooperatives and employee-owned businesses. When we buy, we do try to go to vendors and source from vendors that are both women, people of color, or businesses, but also employee-owned. And my third strategy, my last strategy, is we have to also build political infrastructure for change. And I know some of us are not political. Politics is pretty dirty right now. But the truth is that economic power without political power is vulnerable. We've seen how quickly corporate commitments to diversity can evaporate under political pressure, how policy changes can redirect billions of dollars away from communities that need investment the most. And when I was working a lot on Amplify Latinx, we understood this. We understood that economic and political power go hand in hand. That's why we helped to get over 30 Latinos and Latinas into public office, into elected roles, hundreds more onto boards, commissions, and leadership roles where they can advocate for policies that drive change. And that's why we use that platform to advocate for public policies that create opportunity and capital for small businesses. So women also have political power to make decisions that can advance these alternative economic models, right? But we need to be in those positions of power, represented at all levels, from corporate boards to city councils to Congress. Economic justice and democracy are inseparable. And that means we have to exercise political power through voting, running for office, leveraging our collective influence to ensure that economic transformation, this change that we want to see, has the political infrastructure to sustain it. And that takes all of us doing it together. So I'm going to end with this. We keep talking about transformation, or I do, right? That does require us to act boldly on multiple fronts. We have to build economic power through business ownership and wealth creation. And you all represent that new generation demanding that capitalism serve people and planet, not just profit. This is actually our moment, right? Not just to claim seats at the existing tables, but to build new ones, to not just access capital, but to control it, to not just work for cool companies, but to have an ownership stake, and not just create businesses, but design new economies. The future is counting on you, and I want to build it together. Thank you.
Wow. What an inspiring set of words. I learned so much from reading your remarks, and I have so many questions, but I will try to limit myself because we want to make sure that we have a few minutes for Q&A. So my first question is, as I was listening to you, you have so much depth of knowledge and varied knowledge, and also you can tell so much passion and commitment. And I was wondering if there is one particular incident from your life or your family's life that really motivated you or that inspired you to do this kind of work. Because this is hard work. You said you've never raised one before, but you're doing it. So you tend to be able to sort of rise to the occasion. Is there anything that we can learn about from you in your personal life?
Sure. So let's make sure this is on.
Is it on?
Is it all right? Let me see you.
Big check on the side.
All right.
There you go.
So I didn't grow up with money, right? I grew up with two immigrant parents, and we lived in public housing. My mom was on every public benefit. So early on, I had to learn, what money means. And I actually still suffer from what I call the trauma of money, right? Because I didn't have it. I feel like we're always, a crisis away from not having it again. And so because of that experience growing up, right, like always struggling, not being able to feel like we could build up, because the other thing about poverty, the one thing that I started to understand after I stopped practicing law, I did 3 years as general counsel for a nonprofit called Companies Working Capital. And they work with very low income families that live in public housing, and they run a program that helps them build savings through their rent payments. When I met the founder of the organization, Sherry Riva, she was explaining that poverty is something that we perpetuate through policy, right? It's not something that it's an individual's fault. Our systems perpetuate poverty. And so many of the policies that surround these public benefits actually keep you poor because you can't save. Like you can't have more than $2,000 in savings if you live in subsidized housing. So if you want to buy a home, how do you save enough to get out, right? So Compass was running these programs that help you actually build enough savings, right? And don't jeopardize your housing. But it was that experience of not having enough, right? Of always feeling like I have to fight for what I have. And then when I finally did, right? When I finally became a lawyer and I was, when I got my first job, and Gloria, you might appreciate this, it was 1998, the dot-com boom. And I started at $85,000, right? I was like, oh my God, I'm rich. Because I was working before that at the DA's office in New York where I was making $27,000. Right? Who can subsist on that, right? Yeah. So 85 today, right? I felt like, wow, I'm rich. Within 6 months, they raised it to 100. And then after that to 125K within a year. And that was because they were trying to retain people, but because I was able to earn that amount, I was able to save very fast. Buy my first condo, pay off very tiny bit of loans, because I was also very fortunate that I had full scholarships to college, business school, and law school. That was a huge difference maker for me. So because of all the combination of those experiences, have made me feel that my mission in life should be to accelerate that for others, but also to tackle these systems that perpetuate poverty and inequality. And so I'm crazy. I love it, actually, because I think there's a lot that we can do that we're still discovering.
Yeah, I hear and I can definitely resonate with this. There is a way in which you have been able to live your life and acknowledge your upbringing, but not internalize a poverty mentality, right? Like being able to really advocate for yourself, to see yourself outside or as part of the system, not necessarily a product of the system, right? So I agree, some policies do keep people in the same state, and that's part of the design. I think I've heard people say the system is working as intended, right? Another question, given that most of the participants here are early and mid-career, I would love to know if you can think about your early and mid-career period. What were some of the things that you think, looking back, really set you up for success, right? And if there's any tips, especially because part of the broken wrong mythology is that women leave because they're getting ready to have a family or they have children. So we'd love to hear what was the thing or what were the things that made you successful and or some things that were not successful and that you can reflect on and what you to overcome.
Yeah. I mean, so you heard I started out as a lawyer, and I don't know if this is a good thing to say, but I started out in a class of 10 other lawyers. By my 8th year, I was the only one there. So everyone else had left or didn't survive because we went through some economic crises. And part of what kept me there was just this one insatiable desire to learn and to know. So I worked really hard. I worked too hard though, because I was the highest biller, which was great for bonuses, right? But at one point I woke up and I didn't have any friends. I was like, I don't have any network. And it made me realize that, we might focus on working hard, on getting noticed, on maybe it's, you want to make money. And I think that's important, especially right if you're building generational wealth. But you also have to build these strong social network. You have to prioritize relationships as well. And I was single, right? I didn't have anyone that I was beholden to. But that moment struck me that one day I was like, well, I don't have a deal right now. I want to go out. I want to call a friend. And I was like, I have no friends. That's no one to call. It sounds so horrible. Anyway, so from there, I was like, I'm building my network again, right? I'm going to focus on not just like the friends, but also the professional network that I need. And also because coming to Boston from New York City, the best city in the world, right? But very diverse city. This was not a diverse city. I found this Boston to be very provincial and insular. And you had to go to certain neighborhoods, right, to get the arroz con gandules and yucateos, right, or roti. And those, we were told, don't go to those neighborhoods because they're dangerous. They don't like people like you, right? So over time, Boston has changed a lot. So one is the building of relationships, I think, is incredibly important. The second was also building a network that was centered around volunteerism. So although I worked crazy hours, I also volunteered on nonprofit boards. There was a group called ALPHA, Association of Latinos in Finance and Accounting, now Latinos for America. But I volunteered to build up their business law initiative. So I was connecting, right, you don't remember, I was connecting lawyers with folks in the wealth management, banking, finance space, because those groups do deals all the time. And I remember the law firm I was at the time, I would ask them, how do you do all this Latino stuff? Like, what is that? And they would say, how do you know Bob Grimm? And how do you know this, this president or this, leader? And I'm like, oh, because I'm putting together an event, right? Or I'm volunteering and I'm organizing this initiative. So actually these volunteer activities built my network with senior leaders. And others started to notice, right? Because the partners in the firm was like, she could draw up some business for us, right? So that's the other, I guess, important part that we don't think about when we're young, right? That we've got to build our networks across very diverse spaces. And a lot of it starts with volunteering for boards, things that you might love and be passionate about, where you can bring your skill. And then I would say challenges along the way. I was fortunate in that I never felt like being a woman held me back or being a woman of color. I used that to my advantage, actually, right? Because we're often told, like, if you're an immigrant, for example, you have an accent. I don't, but if you do, right, that you are not valued, that we don't like that you can't speak well. You don't understand the culture here. I actually say, I know 2 languages. I'm multicultural. I can code switch, right? I have skills that others may not. And so flipping that on its head to be a asset is something that I had to work on over time to say, what I bring to the table is actually really valuable. And that's actually what happened, right? Being able to build relationships across so many diverse communities. Over time, boards were coming to me and saying, can you help us find board members? Can you help us figure out how to tap into this community? And that was just from connecting and networking. And so challenges have really been about how do I not take on too much, but also how do I really bring what I think is my strengths and my gifts. Are we done? I'm so sorry. I'll stop. But to bring strengths and gifts so that we can accelerate the pace, right, of advancement for other people. Like, I feel like that's my challenge, and that how do we go faster? How do we go more aggressive? And bolder.
Thank you. I'll take that beep as a sign that the audience may have some questions. So, any questions? I really appreciate everything you're saying, and I have so many more questions for myself, but I want to make sure that we have a few minutes with you all. Back corner.
I'll try to shout. Everybody here? Okay. Thank you so much for being here today. I think throughout your story, you were talking or alluding a little bit to the scarcity mindset that capitalism depends on to keep us engaged and going. I'm curious how you've been able to reframe that into an abundance mindset, or positive framing that works for you, especially as somebody like me that relates to your story. And sometimes I really struggle with getting my family on board with thinking about investing in wealth building as a vehicle for betterment instead of thinking about it as a risky subject. It doesn't.
I know, like my mom saved, cash under the mattress.
Yes.
In little bottles, yeah. So I think it's partly by exemplifying, right? There are little things that I started to do when I began my career, and I actually learned them fortuitously, right? Like no one said you should be doing this. Today, there's so much more in terms of resources for helping us, get into investments that are safer. So one is just if you're working and your employer has a 401k, take advantage of it, right? And save up to the max. And show your parents or your family, right? Like, look, this investment of whatever it was, your $9,000 is now 18, right? And the point is you have to start young, right? Because that's how you compound it, right, over time. So I think it's showing some examples and you doing it. And also just education, right? There are many more, I would say, platforms today, fintechs, apps, like another lawyer, he started, Trevor Rosier started Stackwell, right, which is supporting investments in public securities for Black communities, right? So there's some that are very culturally adapted. But I think we don't have the luxury of sitting back anymore.
Yeah.
Right? You have to build up wealth for your family. When my mom started to see like, oh, that makes money? Okay, here, instead of putting it in the lottery ticket, she's like, that's it for me. And she actually did. My mom was like, she would win contests a lot. I don't know, she was such a funny girl. But she won $10,000 and instead, I knew and instead of putting it under the mattress, she's like, could you invest this for me? Can you, generate a little bit of this for me? And then that's for you when I pass on. I was like, oh, she trusts me. Yeah. So sweet. Yeah. I love moms. Yay, moms. Any other question? Yes?
You talk about investing capital, like having this, just by investing and getting into understanding more about angel investing and venture capital and all of this. But for many women, those are very big words. It's like, that's not for me, that's for somebody else. Maybe you get into having a financial advisor and that's like, woo, right? So how would you suggest for people that really want to go beyond the financial advisor?
Yeah.
And you talked about starting to belong to groups and things like that, but how do you even find those groups? Or, because some of them are not necessarily, because now there are many, some of them are not necessarily for you. So how to decide which one is the right group and find them?
Yeah, so I guess a couple of caveats to all this, right, is that for angel investing or investing in private securities, we have something called securities laws, right, that actually create limits on or barriers as to who can invest, right? So you're right, like you have to be what's called accredited. Accredited investor means that you make $200,000 in annual income or $300,000 with your spouse, or you have a net worth of $1 million, right? This was the way the securities laws are trying to protect you from investing in risky things. And so wealth advisors don't want to be in the business of recommending private securities, right? They only do public market retail stuff unless you've got an enlightened advisor. So you have to look for them on your own. And the way I did it was, one is I started to immerse myself, as I said, in this ecosystem of supporting small businesses. And I was like, where can I get capital? And that's what led me to these groups, so angel groups. But there's also investment circles, right? There's, so if you're accredited, I would say find the angel groups. There are many here. There's Astia Angels, there's Chloe Capital. There's one that I invested in a few times. It's called Portfolio, where you can put a minimum, I think it is $10,000 and they have an investment committee that invests only in women-owned ventures, and they have different kinds of tracks. Like one track is the New America Fund that invests in women of color-led ventures, but you have the trust of really seasoned investors. And in fact, one of those funds already returned their capital back to me, right? So I feel like, okay, I'm taking risks because these are risky investments, right? You're putting your own money into something that is not a public security, and you may lose it all, right? So I say if you can take the risk, do it. Just to put a plug in to what I do, I never learned about community-based funds, CDFIs, right? So these are institutions that are proliferated across the country that invest in small businesses. Their goal, right, is to support economic development. We are now a CDFI, and we have a community note where you don't have to be accredited, and you can invest in us as low as $1,000. It pays you back your money plus 5%, right? So it's a little bit better than a bank, but we did that on purpose to be able to create those investment opportunities for ordinary people. And there are other CDFIs that do that as well, right? Where you can support a community investment. And in fact, I have this young Latina who came to me. I was on a podcast for her, and I said, hey, this is what I'm doing at BII. And she said, Betty, I've been saving this money to do my private training because I want to get in shape, but instead I'm going to put it into BII because I believe in what you do, and I want to support the businesses in my community. So sometimes it just takes one person, right, to believe in you and take the risk. I can show you also, there's a lot of websites that aggregate these resources, but come talk to me, right? Or we can host a conversation, right, together around these opportunities, because I think it is really important to get more women comfortable, right, with investing in this way. And I fell upon it, and just because I'm curious, it's like, let me play with it. We can take a little risk, right? But I understand that everyone has the luxury to do that, and I love to help get people more comfortable in the way that's safest for them.
Yeah, it sounds like there is also an element of language that is also a barrier, and that because of the internet and different resources, we do have some opening, but there's probably some cultural barriers that then come with that. And since we don't have enough organizations like Boston Impact, and we don't have enough folks really translating the information to the greater public in a way that is accessible, right?
Yeah. But also, I think a lot from my own experience. When I was starting my business, right, I was like, who's going to invest in me? Right? Are you going to invest in me? Do you believe in me? So think about the friends and family. That's what we're missing, right? Many of us don't have the friends and family, the wealthy uncle, the padrino that can just put, a $10,000 check. So part of it also came from like, can I do that? Like, you don't need a lot to help a business start up. And in our Latino culture, there's also a perception like, why would I invest in this little business versus buy real estate, right? Like, so I was trying to shift that perception too.
Thank you so much. One more question and then we'll wrap up.
All right.
Hi.
My question. Love and excitement. So we get that. My question is on green investments and conscious capitalism.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that women can invest responsibly, build something that is more profitable to the farmers and the people. So how do you steer this landscape for women right now saying to green investments, or even build a business that is more sustainable, competing with?
Well, it's a good question. So at BII, we recognize that it's not enough to just, support small businesses that are creating good jobs and, and providing opportunities for workers, but that we also have to invest in businesses that are advancing climate resilience and our clean energy transition. And so we devote a portion of our funds to investing in those kinds of companies. But there's also lots of, there are climate-oriented funds, there's public funds too that
are focused on climate, or they're also getting rid of the bad, right? Like they're not investing in things like fossil fuels or, or in defense contracting. So you could also invest responsibly by not investing in things that harm our economy and our environment. I would say because of the current administration, but also prior to that, there's been a big backlash, right, around investing in ESG or investing in climate. But I would say there's also another very strong coalition of investors that are working very hard to protect this kind of investing. And it actually, one, it generates very strong return. The fact is that in red states, renewable energy, right, is proliferating more rapidly because it creates really good jobs, it lowers energy costs. They know it's actually good business, but the politics around it are not positive. So I would say you can find, that the other thing that I did when I came to BII, we started a 401k plan, and I intentionally picked out ESG rated funds, right? I said, we're not gonna have whatever these other ones, right, that have assets and things that may not always be favorable to our communities. And so that's another way that you can still do very traditional investing, but they're funds that are already, right, put together for you and you don't have to think about it too much. Thank you so much, Betty. Let's give Betty some. Please reach out, LinkedIn. I love to talk about this. We host workshops around our approach in blended capital. And I think it's really important, right, for us to champion these models. And I hope that we start to take a class on co-op. I need to tell my year here.
Wow. I'm failing on my tech. I did it.